Last weekend I played the Hell Let Loose Vietnam Open Beta and had a great time, despite the performance issues everyone encountered. As a historian of the Vietnam War, and a PhD candidate writing my dissertation on the Cambodian incursion, I was particularly pleased with the game's depiction of the conflict. I believe historical accuracy in games and films matters. Most people will engage with these portrayals far more than any book or primary source. These depictions shape public understanding of the past for better or worse. When done well, they can spark genuine interest and deeper insight. That's why I think games about historical conflict should strive for reasonable accuracy. Hell Let Loose Vietnam does a great job effectively replicating the scale of combat during the Vietnam War. The vast majority of the fighting in Vietnam consisted of small unit actions. According to data on enemy activities collected by the United States military, 95% of all enemy ground attacks happened below the battalion level. And since 80% of all instances of combat were initiated by the communists, this proportion is reasonably representative of the scale of combat generally. Unfortunately, the statistics for American-initiated combats is less useful due to the odd way the military chose to measure their activities, called battalion days of combat. The 50 versus 50 matches in the game replicate the scale of the mini platoon and company-sized contacts pretty well. Any given firefight you encounter in the game is roughly the same size as many of the actual firefights that took place during the war. For reference, American companies in the field averaged only 164 men. Vietnamese companies were generally even smaller. The game also does a fantastic job accurately depicting the NVA as a professional, modern, regular army, far more capable of intense and even conventional combat than they are generally given credit for. The Viet Cong's guerrilla exploits have become so famous that the capabilities of the NVA are wildly underestimated. During the siege of Ngoc in 1972, the NVA unleashed a massive 8,300-round artillery barrage on the city during the night of May 11th. For comparison, they maxed out at 1,300 rounds fired in a single day during the siege of Khe Sanh in 1968. The inclusion of mortar teams was nice considering their heavy use. In 1967 alone, the communists were responsible for over 16,000 indirect fire incidents, most of which were mortar. The game properly gives the NVA access to plenty of firepower, and even heavy weaponry like tanks, which they used increasingly towards the end of the war. While the NVA and U.S. military only fought one tank engagement against each other, the NVA did fight many tank battles against the South Vietnamese. North Vietnamese armored forces proved vital to their victory, ultimately busting down the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon and ending the war. As a result, I'm pleased that the game's depiction of the NVA gives them their due. The tunnel system also did a fantastic job capturing the chaos of combat during the war. Multiple times while playing as the Americans, I thought to myself, how did the enemy get behind us? And I had no idea where they were coming from. This matches soldiers' descriptions of fighting in Vietnam. Michael Butash of the 25th Division explained that combat was pure confusion, very fast, and it happened when you least expected it. And Larry Fontana from the same division claimed, combat always came in degrees. You can be in the worst of it by walking into the kill zone of a prepared enemy ambush, or be on the edge of a fight that another unit was fighting. There were times that you were literally fighting for your life in close combat or trading shots at 200 yards at a fleeing enemy. The tunnels in the game create the exact kind of confused, random firefights these soldiers describe, giving the game solid authenticity. However, I should note that tunnels were far more common among the VC than the NVA. I do have several issues with the game's portrayal of combat, however. The American forces lack the overwhelming firepower advantage they had throughout the Vietnam War, which mattered most in combat. It was American practice to spend bullets, not lives, in the fighting, and they relied heavily on air power and artillery to overwhelm the enemy. While the game gives commanders access to artillery and napalm strikes, America's firepower advantage didn't feel as impactful as the NVA tunnels in the asymmetrical gameplay loop. During the war, conventional airstrikes far outnumbered napalm bombing runs. During the Cambodian incursion, the U.S. Air Force dropped napalm over 9,000 times, but they dropped a massive 28,500-pound general-purpose bombs. American firepower in the game currently doesn't match the reality. The presence of mines and booby traps is another area where the game currently falls short. There aren't any booby traps, and mines are seldom used by players. Colonel Hoang Ngoc of Arvin explained that to wear down and delay the advance of the enemy, mines and booby traps were frequently employed. In fact, mines and booby traps caused the most Arvin losses in vehicles and personnel. In the first quarter of 1970, More than half of the Vietnamese Marine Corps casualties were caused by mines. Currently, the game doesn't capture this ever-present threat that weighed heavily on the soldiers in the field. I'm very pleased with the game's depiction of the terrain. It wonderfully illustrates the stunning landscapes of the Vietnamese countryside. Whenever I was flying around in a Huey, I would look out the side and marvel at the jaw-dropping view. American soldiers shared the same sentiment when they first flew into Vietnam. James Coppola said, "Your first impression is, what a beautiful country. There is what looks to be a white coastline, brilliant greens, the rice paddies etched on the land. It's beautiful from the sky." I also found the density of the vegetation to be very accurate. In places it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Spotting the enemy in the bushes and jungle was often a Herculean task. Visibility was a very real issue for the Americans, and they took steps to mitigate the problem. Playing the game, one can understand why the military chose to use things like Agent Orange. It was a chemical defoliant that they used to clear vegetation throughout the country, but especially near American bases. Ultimately, its admittedly effective use came at a horrific human cost. It also demonstrates why the military used roam plow, bulldozers with a big blade attached to the front, to cut down jungle in the latter part of the war. Players are unsurprisingly frustrated by the dense foliage, so the game could take a cue from history to make the experience a bit better. The U.S. often cleared several hundred yards out from American bases or major roads to provide unobstructed fields of fire when defending installations or convoys. Removing some foliage around the objectives might improve the experience in a historically accurate way. While I enjoyed the map we got to play in the beta, Thanh Hoa, I thought it was an odd choice for the game. Thanh Hoa is a city in North Vietnam. There was never any ground fighting at Thanh Hoa, though there was plenty of bombing. The Thanh Hoa Bridge was a strategic choke point on North Vietnam's supply lines from Hanoi down to the south. It was bombed numerous times during Operation Rolling Thunder, before finally being knocked out in Operation Linebacker during 1972 by F-4 Phantoms with Paveway laser-guided bombs. The game map matches some of the geography around the real-life bridge, but it just feels like a strange choice to create a map around a place where no fighting happened. There were plenty of bridges in the south that were attacked throughout the war that could have been used as inspiration instead. With all that said, I'm looking forward to the game's release and seeing all of the other details and maps that the developers have in store for it. These were my first impressions upon playing the game, and I hope to take a more detailed look at it when it comes out. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. See ya.